We'd like to get started. This is a budget preliminary meeting. We're going to have slightly more informality to the presentations and discussions this evening, and we actually can interchange with you as you come up to speak and present. So we've not got the timer. The timer is in Jeff and my heads. So when you see us go forward like this, that means you probably should start bringing it to a close. But seriously, we're looking forward to having an opportunity to exchange ideas with individuals around our budget. The budget is the most important document that we issue each year. This is how priorities are established. So I would like to begin by asking our city manager and our finance manager to make an overview presentation of the slides that they have put together. At that point, we will be asking some questions, and then we will move in, once we have asked a few questions, to allowing everyone in the public who would like to come forward and speak to have an opportunity to speak, and we will try to exchange questions with you as you come forward to speak. So with that, David, is it you or Jeff that's going to...
Actually, if I could... just a brief.
Oh, you get to.
No, thank you. I took my tie off, so people did feel this was a little more informal. The one thing, as we go through the presentation, which I think will be really helpful for folks to have a sense, I just sort of want to follow up what Lisa said, budgets or priorities. And so this is, and really appreciate staff, a balanced budget. So if people have ideas for more money they would like to see us spend, it would be great as you watch the presentation to think of things that you think may not be as important as what you're recommending, because we can only spend more if we cut from somewhere else. So I just wanted people to think about that as staff goes through the presentation, because ultimately what council will decide is if we add something, we're going to take something away. What is that and how do we balance those? So just give that some thought, because that would be helpful for us as well as just ideas for new spending. And with that, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, council members. I would just note that the finance director is going to give a brief presentation. We've made some modifications to the presentation that we saw originally based on some council direction. I would also know that with regard to the possibility of Measure C, which is on the ballot, if that does pass, that's obviously going to have an impact on our budget, and the finance director has added a couple slides that will sort of discuss that in a little bit more detail. That being said, Jeff, why don't you go ahead and proceed? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy. I'll proceed quickly through the slides, starting with the overview summary here. We have a $126 million general fund budget. We're focusing on that this evening. We'll be presenting the other funds over the coming meetings. Here is our revised summary for the general fund. You'll see, as Dr. Reddy indicated, we have a surplus indicated right now of just over $1.2 million for the current year. We also have in new items in the prior year, we're showing a $4 million transfer to our new CalPERS Reserve Fund and additional capital of $1.5 million for additional needs there. We also are showing a new item here, additional staff budget recommendations of $960,000. We'll get to that summary in a moment, but we are presenting at this point if all these items are included, we have a revised surplus of $258,000, which would give us a reserve of 19%. To get a better concept of our overall reserve position, again, these first numbers are from that previous slide of the $20 million projected ending balance for next year with a 19% reserve. But we also have the new council-directed CalPERS reserve set aside, and with the combination of all of the monies we're looking at for these couple of years, we would be ending next year with a $11.25 million CalPERS reserve. And for the public, so this is for future anticipated CalPERS increases as they are anticipated to steadily rise over the next few years. So some major additions in this budget, all of these items are included. For the current year, we're adding $3 million to that CalPERS reserve, and we have several capital items we've added, and there are some departmental reorganization items and departmental budget requests that were previously presented at the April 4th meeting, and those are included in the budget. Our major revenue categories are here, and we'll show you some details on the major increases versus the prior year. And most notably, we've added the Measure D sales tax is the new item, which was approved by the voters, went into effect April 1st, and I've increased my estimate for this to $7.1 million. Here's the major increase items. The additional item at the bottom is there we've calculated the anticipated CPI to be approved by council at the 2.5% level, which would bring in about $250,000. Major expenditures, and this is not including the interfund transfers out for things like some debt service items, but we've added the CalPERS set aside as a slice on this, and also called out the hotel incentive item. In the previous presentation, these items were both included with the administration pie slice, and that was a little confusing to folks, so we broke those two items out here. Here's the major items resulting in the expense increases for next year's budget. Other significant items are noted here also. And then here's that new list that was not presented previously that we're presenting for the first time tonight. These are born out of the meetings with the council subcommittee as additional items of interest for consideration for the council at large. These will be included in the presentation to the council at their next meeting, the first meeting in May. And here's a summary of where we're at with our capital funding for the current year. We've got $4 million in the budget for streets, $3 million out of Measure J, and an additional $1 million out of the general fund being transferred over to the capital projects fund. The $4.2 million item there for facilities, that represents the balance of Measure J funds, which have not previously been allocated, and Measure J will be joining the City Council on May 2nd to present and discuss their recommendations to the council at large. The next two columns indicate both the 5-year and 10-year projected need for both streets and facilities, and I'll note that none of these have solid funding sources identified for them at this time. These are just purely the needs based upon the current a report that council has received. Now, the major concern for this budget year, of course, is whether or not Measure C will pass on June 5th. As the council has previously received information, the consultant analysis had presented that the estimated loss would be $10.5 million. That after that kicks in 2 years. In response to that, we've already come up with a projected list of potential cuts to the budget. Now, we've only looked at the expenditure side. There are obviously always could be revenue enhancements considered, but we would, based upon the council subcommittee's direction, we've come up with 3 basic options. One would be to go at an 8% across the board cut, which sounds rather straightforward. It's rather challenging to actually implement when you're looking for 8% in each department. That could be done, but it's a challenge. Option 2 would be to do the same approach, but to keep public safety held out of that whole consideration. And so the percentage would go up to 13% of non-safety budgets in order to get at the $8.5 million number. Now, I'll just mention, to get to the $10.5 million number. Now, both of these items would exclude Measure J at this point, and also debt service payments. The final option is a third one. It would be more program specific, and the next 2 slides are going to kind of lay out those options. And I think at this point where I'm going to pause and let council discuss these items as they indicated they wanted to give some information, unless you'd like me to start on giving the overall summary.
No. I'll go ahead and get started, and then I think Councilmember Coors will also have some comments. We thought it was important for everyone to be aware that if Measure C does pass, there are going to be budget implications to it. We are not advocating any one of these 3 options. All of us have had experience at one time or another with attempts at across-the-board cuts, and they are extremely difficult to implement. No doubt, if in fact Measure C passes, we will be looking at some variation of all 3 of these approaches to making cuts. These are options that would be before City Council, but they are things that everyone in the public should be aware of. The purpose in making these known is not to try to scare people, as I am sure some folks will say. It is to inform individuals as to what the potential consequences are going to be if we have to make a reduction of $10 million in this budget. And no one should believe that making cuts of this magnitude are going to be easy. They would be extremely difficult. No one sitting up here wants to make cuts of this nature, but it is one of the consequences that we face if Measure C is passed by the voters.
Great, thank you. So I just want to thank staff. I know both Councilmember Middleton and I have talked about how much we appreciate the amount of work that Jeff, your department goes through, but all the departments in preparing a budget and making the request to the city manager who has to go through everything before we start doing the work on it. So as always, a really wonderful job and very much appreciated. Just a couple comments going through this. So one thing, so on the CalPERS reserve set aside, and our sort of goal was to put away,
$6.5 million.
About $6.5 million a year on a rolling 5-year average. So it's really $8 million this year, right? It's the 3 you had already plus an additional 5.
That's correct.
So that'll get us to about 11 of the 30 we need, but we've paid some of that with the increased costs this year and last year. So we're about on track with our goal, is what I see on this, by adding as much as we are this year.
Yes.
And anything less would probably take us off that track. So I think it is good news. I think what we set up last year is so we know in year 5, and now we're in year 2 of this, the increase is about $14 million more a year than we were paying. And so if we don't put the money away for those big increases, in 3 or 4 years, we're going to have to see dramatic cuts unless CalPERS makes a lot of money and they change their projections. So it's just a responsible thing we need to do, and I just wanted to highlight that. I want to highlight what you said about Measure D, the half-cent sales tax, because when we decided to move forward with it, we sort of shared with the public that in order to be able to do everything we do, we needed that, and it has allowed us to actually continue our current budget, add some new priorities, but is really making a difference in what would be a very challenging environment without it, as far as having to look at cuts. So very much appreciate the voters of our city stepping up and doing this, because it has allowed us already to add 6 police personnel, 6 firefighter paramedic personnel, and do a lot of these other things here. I only have 1 or 2 other comments. Going to street repairs, given, at least for the subcommittee, our recommendation was a reserve in the 16, 17%. And I think since we know it takes $5 million a year to be able to continue road repairs and then maintain them so we don't run into this $75 million hole again, at least my recommendation, I think both of ours, would be to take $1 million out of that reserve to street repairs and hit the $5 million mark and not have us start falling behind, because that put us in such a big hole in the past and it's making a real difference. So that is a recommendation we're going to make. I do think on page 13, the 10.5 million loss, and the city attorney probably knows this number better than almost anyone as we've gone back and forth. Is that vacation rental TOT or vacation rental TOT and sales tax? Just so we're clear on what that is.
That number's considerably more than just TOT.
Right. It's the revenue loss to the city, and that also includes sales tax. So just so we clear that up, so people don't think there's additional on top of that. That's with everything that the city would be losing. And I think that's all I have for this point. Just things I wanted to note before public comment. Did you have?
A couple of points, and I want to pick up on street repairs because it's something that I put a lot of energy into, and I really want to thank staff and the prior city council for their commitment on street repairs. If you go back approximately 4 years, we were looking at an estimate of over $75 million to bring all of our streets up to a satisfactory level. In the last 3 years, City Council has invested $22.5 million in street repairs. That, coinciding with good oil prices, has allowed us to get far more bang for the dollar. And the estimate that I'm seeing right now is, Marcus, am I correct, somewhere in the vicinity of $35 to $40 million to bring every street up to satisfactory. If we can spend the $5 million on an annual basis over the next 5 years, we can not only improve the number of streets that we have that are at satisfactory, we should be able to bring every street in our city to a satisfactory level. And given that we spent almost nothing on street repairs at the height of the recession, this is something that I really want to applaud and continue to push that, that we do make that $5 million a year commitment. Something else, though, that flipping back to page 7, not only did we have a $7 million increase in sales tax, we had a $1.1 million increase in the property taxes that came in. That's a testament to how hot and how strong the Palm Springs real estate market is, and we are now seeing the benefit of that in terms of our ability to have revenues that we can use to pay down our PERS obligations and to invest in additional public safety. That.
And I will throw out one more thing, which is, and it's not a 7-figure thing, so you'll be happy, but we do need a couple things. One is to put some money in the budget and we'll be prepared on May 2nd to discuss it from our subcommittee that's doing the Voting Rights Act for public outreach and community forums and a demographer and all the things that go with the district election process. We want to do interactive maps so people actually can draw their own maps and submit them. So we want to put money aside there. We also want, as we're about to go into recruitment for our boards and commissions, to put some money into doing actual advertising for it, because I think the same issue that applies at the council level applies to our boards and commissions as far as not reflecting the diversity of our city. And so we need to do, I think, different outreach and put some dollars into that effort to make sure we're getting as diverse a possible pool of applicants into the process.
Dr. Reddy, Mr. Kyle, do you have any further that you want to present to us as introduction? Okay.
We haven't shown the public both these potential reduction slides. This is the first one, and here's the second one. We'll be coming back to these, I'm sure.
Again, these are potential areas that we would need to look at in terms of cuts. These are not decisions that we have made.
Yes, that's correct. And those are focused on Measure C impacts. Now, this is the slide that council has been seeing since over a year ago. And this is the dramatic change that the entire state is dealing with. And it's got a couple of factors to it. The discount rate, which is basically a fancy term for saying the rate that CalPERS is assuming they're going to earn on investments on our money that's deposited with them. So based upon performance declines over the recent years, they have changed what their estimate is for their 20-year average from the 7.5% rate. And you'll see down below on the new discount rate line, it's showing a declining rate first at 7 3/8 and then down to 7%. It doesn't sound like much, but it has a massive increase on contributions required by public employers. Now, the part that we haven't discussed is on February 14th, they implemented a new set of changes. And the most significant of those is the lowering of the amortization schedule on the debt, on the unfunded liability, if you will, from 30 years to 20 years. So I liken this to if you have a floating adjustable rate mortgage and you're going from a 30-year mortgage and you decide you're going to refinance and do a 20-year mortgage, yeah, you're going to save a lot of money in those outer years on interest costs, but you're definitely going to be paying a lot more up front. You know, I talked to the senior actuary for CalPERS and separately our own actuary for CalPERS, and neither one of them would even admit that our future obligations for the years beginning in 21-22 and 22-23, where you have the question marks there, they wouldn't even admit that it was going to be a positive or a minus. As they said, we were doing other reforms and it could all come out in the wash. So cities and other entities are kind of on our own right now to do our best efforts to make these projections. So hopefully with the next set of actuarials, which will come out sometime between July and October or even late as December, they will have revised numbers. But these numbers are the CalPERS projections for us at this point. So when you see that line there going from current contributions of 16-17 from 13.5 million to almost doubling out in 22-23, that's That's what's been motivating most of our actions for this past year. And then I'll also point out, included in this is our retiree health insurance obligations, which are much smaller but growing also, which are there in that bottom line.
Jeff, if you could stay with that slide for a moment.
Sure.
The strategy that we have been trying to follow over the last year has been to, while we are in good times, set aside additional money, try to have a rolling 5-year average of money that we are setting aside over and above what we're obligated to do for CalPERS. Are there additional steps that either you or Dr. Reddy feel we should be taking?
Well, one of the things we've done already is CalPERS has made available an option to do a prepayment at the beginning of the fiscal year, which pays a substantial portion of our annual obligation. And we took advantage of that this year, and we're saving about $250,000 from just that move. Because, and that's after considering lost interest income.
And the pension benefits that will be payable to employees who were hired after the California Public Employee Retirement Reform Act, or PEPRA, what is that percentage of our total workforce right now?
The last figures I saw were very consistent with the figures I presented last year, which was approximately 1/3 of our workforce. Unfortunately for us, from a financial point of view, many of those employees that were newer didn't stay with us. So even though we've had a lot of other retirements and new hires, that number has been staying relatively the same. I've just got one more slide, and that's just our path from here moving forward. Here's our next steps to adoption of the budget.
Dr. Reddy, anything further that you would like to say at this point?
Thank you, Council Member. I would just like to note there is one other area that we're still trying to piece together to finalize it. I'm trying to make sure we have at our council meeting next week, and that is with regard to the fire department. It appears we're going to need some additional, and I mentioned this last week, additional inspections that will be offset by fees, so it should basically be a cost neutral. We're just trying to get our arms around exactly what that need is, vis-a-vis also with some cannabis inspections, and I will have that hopefully for you next week.
All right. Folks, anyone who would like to speak, we do not have speaker cards this evening, so what I would ask is if you are interested in speaking to us, please line up over here on my right and your left along the wall. We will take folks one at a time, and as I said, when I nod off, then you've spoken long enough. John?
3 minutes. Thank you for this opportunity. I first have some questions, general questions about the budget, but my specific reason for being here is the homelessness budget and my interest in that issue. The 3 questions that I have, number one, the Buzz Bus was apparently killed in February, but is there any funding remaining for that service in the 18-19 budget at any level? Second question is that in the current year's budget, 17-18, it appears that the golf course, the public golf course, operates at $1 million loss. I'm asking if that is in fact the case, and what is the anticipated loss for this current fiscal year? Lastly, I know that in 2009, the city borrowed $5 million to help pay for the new $7 million animal shelter. But I don't see any debt service on this bond. And so my question is, has the debt been discharged? I do have a recommendation now on the homeless issue, but I would like to have a little scene setting before I put that recommendation forward. Budgets are supposed to reflect the values, needs, and priorities of an organization, a company, or a community. Now, concerning the homeless, I believe that the homeless situation in Palm Springs is a major crisis. Accordingly, the Palm Springs homeless budget should reflect such a crisis view. I'm grateful for the work the city has been doing. Progress has been made. I believe that there's going to be movement on converting the North Palm Springs Fire Station into a respite center, which is fantastic. And there's been progress getting the county case managers on the streets and in the camps. But I believe that much, much more needs to be done, and I suggest that the City Council reflects that in its proposed budget for 2018-19. Now, on the other hand, the city may in fact believe that it is not a Palm Springs issue, but one that should be seen really as a regional issue, and therefore we should look to CVAG to take the lead in planning and providing the resources for tackling homelessness, especially in the West Valley, with Palm Springs playing perhaps a secondary role. That view has merit, and I do know that CVAG has been making some good moves. They seem to be headed in the right direction. We'll hope that the Path of Life proves to be an effective and impactful service. And I'm delighted that CVAG has hired HARC to undertake an assessment of existing and new services in the Coachella Valley for the homeless and gaps in service that may remain. But I must ask, shouldn't the city be doing more on our own? After all, Palm Springs accounts for nearly half of the homeless population in the West Valley. Shouldn't the homeless task force be reinvented with a deadline-driven agenda, management accountability, and participation that brings in some key stakeholders that I have not seen at these meetings, such as Desert AIDS, Desert Regional and Eisenhower Hospitals, the Chamber of Commerce, etc. Such a reinvention would require a dedicated staff member, at least a part-time consultant, to move the city toward a more rapid and more purposeful engagement in the fight against homelessness. There may be grant money or some daylight in this budget before you finish your work in 2 months to pay for such a person. I do hope so. And I also hope the city will welcome more volunteer engagement in the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. So since we can be a little more interactive, and sort of 3 questions, maybe we'll do at the end with other questions since that's staff, but on homelessness, and this is for David. I mean, I know we sort of have parts of different staff working on it, but we really don't have one dedicated staff. So if you can sort of explain how we coordinate that, because I think that would be helpful for folks.
Yeah, and I think a general statement I would like to make, and because the gentleman raised an important question, that it is an issue at our doorsteps. The reality is the structural arrangement of government is local government is not involved in social services. It's a function of county government. They're the ones that receive the tax dollars to handle it. Obviously, as we know, they're not able to handle the issues. The issue is us, and so council has gone above and beyond what they're required to do, in essence taken money from the general fund for other services and used it for homeless services. Now, certainly we've had some improvement. Clearly council wants to do more. With regard to the coordination, it's manifested in a couple ways. One, clearly the police department is involved with personnel dedicated to the homeless, working in conjunction with our Community Development Department, which is administering grants from the healthcare district and is doing the hiring of the county for the additional healthcare workers, social workers. That being said, it's the main locus of the coordination is between community development and the police department. The chief is very involved. The director of community development is very involved. I think we have a good coordination, although we're certainly open to looking at maybe a little different, broader pathways as well.
And so I do have a couple comments on it. First, on the staffing note, because I do think one person who's really focused, and maybe it's a combination of both homelessness and housing affordability for working families, because without that, we end up having people who lose their homes and end up homeless. It's something worth looking at, and it might be thinking about some of the Desert Healthcare District for some funding towards that. We may have some funding, extra funding from our new wraparound services, if we don't use that entire grant amount, that we might want to reallocate. So just some ideas as we look at that idea, because I do think it's a really good idea, and we talked about it at the task force, and I've been thinking about it since. But while we're on this, I do want to share a little, because in this budget, just so folks are aware, there's an additional $200,000 this year to do wraparound services, which will include a case manager and employment specialist who are exclusively focused on working with our residents who are homeless to help get them off the street. And that's new funding. And there's also the full crisis team is about $350,000. We're adding a second one that we didn't have last year. Not all of that money comes from a grant we wrote to the Desert Healthcare District, actually asking for $2 million investment in West Valley homeless-related programs, which they agreed to. And so that will enable us to do more. The CVAG program in the first 6 months has had some very good success. I think about 26 people who were on the streets are now housed, and about the same number of people got rental assistance who otherwise would be on the streets. So that program, which is new, we're starting to see results, which is terrific as well. But we can always do more. And I think this also is going to fit into the conversation we subsidize a lot of units when they were built, and as those expire, making sure we have funding to keep those people in those subsidized units, because preventing homelessness is as important as addressing the people who are currently homeless, because otherwise they're just cycling different people on and off the streets, and the goal is to get as many people off the streets as possible. So I think the city in the last 2 years has really seen an increase in focus and in resources towards this. I do agree we can and should do more, and we're one of the few cities in the county to see a significant decline in the number of homeless in the point-in-time count, despite having twice as many volunteers on the streets. So it is progress, as John mentioned, but we still have a lot of people who don't have a roof over their head every night, and that has to be a top priority. So I appreciate those comments, John.
And I would add to that when we look at the budget and what we're spending on homeless, these items are spread across a wide range of different departments. And one of the things that staff, and I applaud them, have been trying to do over just the last 48 hours is to bring together the various expenditures that we do make with regard to homeless services and put them in a single exhibit so that we can, for the public, make a very clear presentation of how much have we spent, how much are we proposing to spend, And within that, I think we do need to be clear about what are absolutely mandatory expenditures that we are making, because the vast majority of the money that we are spending for homeless services are discretionary decisions that Palm Springs has made to invest more than we are obligated when it comes to homeless services. Hopefully it will be enough and as we move forward. So,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Yep,
yeah.
you're on.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, my name is Kathy Brandt, and I'm here to speak about two budget items that relate to the Palm Springs Library. And I'm urging the City Council to reverse the trend that has been in existence for the last 12 or 14 years and spend some money on our beloved library. Since 2007, staffing at the library has decreased by 39%, while the visits, daily visits, and circulation have increased dramatically. In 2007, there were over 23 full-time equivalent staff, 23. Now there are 14. And this is along with the circulation that has increased from 353,000 items up to 431,000. Two items are on your list for possible funding for next year. One half of a librarian, one half, and $100,000 to renovate the J.C. Frey building. Now we all know that the Frey building needs to be really renovated from the studs up, and it is an important part of the budget, and actually has a lot of potential for increasing revenue for the city, with being able to rent it out to different service groups, to hold functions there and things like that. But the library building itself needs renovation. No matter if we get a new library within the next 10, 20 years, probably not in my lifetime, but up until that point that a decision is made about the library, a new library, we have to live with the old one. And it's a beautiful building. It's a historic building, but it is in dire need of renovation of the infrastructure. This has been bandied about, they're been band-aided about. We just had a bad plumbing problem this year. Things need to be done there. But I would also encourage you to find some place in your city budget to hire a whole librarian. 14 people working in that library doing what they do is phenomenal. I can't understand how they keep going. And they need at least one whole person. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have had the opportunity to meet with the Friends of the Palm Springs Library, and it was a very, very positive meeting. Councilmember Holstage and I are members of the library subcommittee. We will be meeting this Thursday with the trustees at their regular meeting. That's Thursday, 3 p.m. in the large conference room here at City Hall. So I certainly encourage everyone who is interested in the libraries to attend that meeting. Subsequently, we are looking forward to meeting also with Palm Springs Foundation. With the purchase of the property by the College of the Desert, there are an awful lot of opportunities that we have to evaluate moving forward as to what the future for our library should be. Lots of options are on the table, and I look very much to being able to interact with the trustees, the foundation, the friends in our community, so that we make the right decisions at the right time for the future of the library. Some of this, in terms of maintenance, These are things that we have identified not only in the library building, but in many buildings throughout Palm Springs. We have aging infrastructure and plumbing, HVAC, roofs that need to be maintained. Thank you.
And let me just quickly, but you walk up while I talk. I do have, I won't comment on too much on the library. We'll have Brown Act issues, so we're trying to talk just on our subcommittee items. But I do want to ask the city manager a question, because my recollection was we were looking at least some initial money to do some repair work for Measure J this year. And I know we're going to be talking with them on May 2nd, but wasn't there about a $500,000 item, or is that not in their top priorities?
Well, I do have a comment on that, but on the exact amount, I don't, is there anything? I don't think there is.
Okay.
With regard to the library, clearly with the announcement that the College of the Desert has acquired the parking, has acquired the old mall, that obviously is going to raise the issue of the discussion of what we do with the library again, which is a very good thing. In the meantime, what we do know is that there's at least $5 million worth of capital that we need to put into the current library. That is a discussion we are going to have with regard to the Fry building. There's a minimal amount going in there to do some things just to keep that operational. But both of those areas are areas that we clearly have to have some detailed discussion on. There's nothing in the budget for them.
Okay. And I would just ask that for the May 2nd, given we'll have this joint meeting on our capital budget, which, as we can see from $160 million in the next 10 years, to really make sure we're looking at the comprehensive list with Measure J, getting their input, and having council start to prioritize what we want to do. And I think May 2nd is a good time to do that, since we'll be in that joint meeting.
Yes.
So thank you. Thank you.
I think this kind of dovetails pretty well. I don't know Pam, and it was great that she went ahead and gave all the facts and figures, because I want to take a little different approach on the library and just state where I see it and how it's useful. I think Lisa mentions talking about public safety. Well, I suggest that the library has a mental safety issue, that if we provide a refuge, a place of tranquility, a place that is welcoming to all and is just full of knowledge and information, it is almost a priceless situation with the library. And kids today, and also adults who are now addicted to their smartphones, need an alternative place where you don't have that tool at hand and you explore the world in other ways. So I've been in that library since about 1990, and I, like Pam, am amazed what they've been able to get out of the staff reduction. But to me, that's not how you keep staff. I assume they're going to collapse and disappear over time here, that they do need additional bodies. No matter how much automation comes in, the library is not a place of automation. So I'm thrilled that, there's an additional meeting that Lisa's going to attend, that perhaps you all recognize that this slide needs to stop. This is Palm Springs imagery and what we can deliver of substance on an intellectual level to people, not just the next big hotel that's going into this town. I personally am not happy at those numbers. I think we could provide, a much more secure and satisfying life to our residents here. You said, where do we get the dollars? I looked at a $980,000 hotel incentive. Why don't we have one less hotel and a more distinguished library that we can compare to any in the valley? All I ever hear is that Rancho Mirage has the library. I think we could easily outshine them with just a few more dollars and a little more focus. Thank you.
Ma'am, could you identify yourself for the record?
Sure. Jan Swallow. I'm on Paseo del Rey.
Thank you. Okay.
And just come up, just for the city manager and for the public, that hotel incentive money, just so folks know, is hotels that spent their own money to renovate, which they weren't doing, get half of just the increase on the TOT that wouldn't have been generated if they didn't renovate, and the city gets the other half. So that is new money, half to the city. That's what then they get back. So that money wouldn't exist minus the renovation. It's not just writing them a check. But your points are very well taken and appreciated, I think, on the library.
Ed McBride.
Oh, you're already taking it away from me. Your Honors, Councilmember Middleton and Mr. Coors. My name is Ed McBride, and I'm honored to be a Palm Springs Public Library trustee, one of those people you were just referencing. I'm also on the Library Foundation as a board member. I'm very proud to be a friend of the library. I'm a local business owner. I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce and a resident of Palm Springs. I normally wing this, but these are important things that I wanted to share with you guys, but some of you know I will wing sometimes. But our library is really lucky to have served 223,218 people at the main library and 64,989 at the Wellwood Murray Memorial Library. Jeannie will correct me if I'm wrong. For a total number of 288,207 citizens and users walked through our door this past year. I think you all would agree that's a pretty busy place and probably one of the busier services that we have in Palm Springs. You've heard this, but I think it's worth repeating. We checked out over 431,283 items in 1 year, proving libraries aren't dead and confirming for us that books, DVDs, magazines, and newspapers and our wonderful technology is a huge draw. By the way, I've worked in libraries for most of my life, and it should be known that print is still a technology that is popular and preferred. I've spent 35 years working in libraries, and I'm really proud of our library for all the reasons you've heard already, but our staff and the love of our community you've already heard. We're beating you guys up tonight, so it's really something to see in a community our size, this much support. And I know that you guys feel the same way, so I know I'm preaching to the choir. And it's very rare, but I think that we're really blessed in Palm Springs to have such a supportive community, and it's time for us to leverage that. I also thank each of you and Mayor Moon, who always come to our events and cheer us on. And I know last year, the reading program, right in the middle of it, and the citizens take note of that, and they really do appreciate that support. I'm here to say thank you. As well as let you know that we are proud of the continued support that you've given to our budget through the years, even though the trustees had a conversation about this not too long ago with the staff. And I think that we know, just from what you've heard so far, that we do a lot with less. I asked Jeannie, what could we do with more? Just imagine. And so that should be our dream, and it should be our goal as citizens, is to someday have more for the library, and all of us be very proud of what that will bring us. Over the coming months, the staff, trustees, foundation, friends, our council liaisons, and the public will be coming together, and we'll be starting a new strategic plan, one that hasn't been done in many years for the library. And we're not calling it a strategic plan, we're calling it a strategic direction, which we think is more important. And it's for the future library programs and services to take our library and our users to the next level of what a world-class library can provide, and show Rancho Mirage what it's all about. By the way, this plan will identify 3 to 5 year goals so that it's much more manageable for us. And it will require your support. We're going to be back in here asking you to consider these things and look at additional funding. And I know that's hard when you're looking at the cost of rising CalPERS and the things you have to be faced with. But I think that if we don't ask, we'll never get there. So it's time for us to focus on that. So, and finally, I just want to thank you for your continued support. And I hope once again our community of supporters, we've just tapped a few. We could have had this room probably full if we'd put the call out. We can count on your approval of Jeannie's budget this year, by all means. And without hesitation, you'll approve that. And I want you to remember my name, because I will be back as a trustee asking for more money in the future. And that's what I have to say. So thank you. Any questions for me as a trustee?
I think those numbers were very helpful, and if I followed the math very quickly, at approximately 430,000 items checked out, that's somewhere close to 9 items being checked out per year for every man, woman, and child living in the city of Palm Springs.
That's remarkable.
That's a pretty impressive number. What I can tell you is that I know Councilmember Holstage and I wanted to be assigned to the Library Committee, and we are looking forward to working with you to evaluate these plans moving forward and to make our library something that we are not only as proud of as we are today, but even more proud of.
At the foundation meeting today, we started talking about the strategic direction, and the list began to grow with people in the community that want to participate in that. So I think that we're going to have really great ideas and plan for us to bring back for you all in the very near future.
And thank you for your work on that.
Thank you.
It's appreciated.
Good evening, I'm Bruce Hoban. As many of you know, I've been to a lot of the budget meetings. And so my question here is, in looking at this proposed budget on page 9, it talks about the bargaining units for the contracts that expire on June 30th. It says TBD. So does that mean right now we are leaving the current contract salary levels in place until that bargaining concludes at the end of June, and therefore, assuming it goes up, there's a lot more, there are more expenses than anticipated, okay? I know that's a sensitive topic to say what it would go up by, but it is a fact that in 2010 we reduced the city employees by 10%, and we've only given them 4% back on that since 2010, and inflation has been over 13% since that time period. So there is some number. So that's really a question, okay? Is, you know, what is this number in the present budget? And then the second one, I heard that the CalPERS expense on newer employees is not really seeing an adjustment yet because we have people keep leaving the city. And so does that imply there's a high turnover in newer employees that we're bringing in because perhaps salaries are not competitive? Those are my two questions. Thank you very much.
Dr. Reddy, would you like to give a start on that, since we are in the middle of just beginning these contract negotiations?
Yeah, I would know, yes. It is to be determined. So the budget is a carryover budget with increases in personnel related, but for any bargaining unit increases. So those would have to come in at the end of the process. That would be an added expense, number one. Number two, with regard to are people paid in Palm Springs enough to keep them here? I would say Palm Springs probably pays a little better than other cities in our comparative set. We just went through a comprehensive fee study, which council will be looking at shortly, and in most cases we're above the median. So I think we're very competitive that way.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? Okay, so why don't we go to the three questions John started with. And so one was BUZZ funding and whether any is left over. And I believe it ends at this fiscal year, June 30th. Now, we did get some funding through our giving money to PS Resorts, who gave it back to us, and that is on a different schedule. So is there any money in that, or is that we'll deplete it?
No, my sense, it was on a fiscal year, so I think it will be depleted. But you will have those dollars in the next fiscal year, obviously, that won't be earmarked.
Okay.
And just to clarify, that was budgeted primarily in the Measure J fund.
Right.
So part of the reason why we have the $3.4 million identified there is, I say 3.4, 4.2 million.
Includes
extra
the
money
buzz.
there.
3.4 million is because you have the buzz funding back.
And then we have another, the 100,000 that we were directing from PS Resorts, because we direct 225,000 in our new contract. We do have some more money there that we can direct, and we haven't directed that yet.
Correct.
Okay, so second was the loss on the golf course, and maybe you can explain that, David. I think the question is, are we going to have the same loss this fiscal year, but maybe explain that whole situation.
The golf course subsidy, it's basically two parts. One is the debt on it, which is approximately $1 million a year. The other is if there's a deficit in their operations. It used to be almost $2 million a year. We've made some structural arrangements and things. The bottom line is now it basically breaks even on operations. However, there still is that yearly about $1 million in debt service. That being said, there's about $7.5 million in debt that remains, and that will be, we just looked at that.
Through 2027.
2027.
Okay. And then the third question was whether there was debt on the animal shelter building.
There is, the animal shelter was funded through redevelopment bond funds, and those are being repaid through the process with the state called the ROPS, Recognized Obligation Payment Schedule. And so it's not costing the city general fund anything to make those payments.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak with regard to the budget? Well, this is the first meeting that we have had on this dedicated. We have many meetings coming up at City Council. This is not going to be the last opportunity for individuals to weigh in, and we certainly receive your phone calls and your emails. I encourage not only those that are in the audience, but those that are watching at home on their laptops and their television screens to reach out to Councilmember Coors and I regarding your suggestions for the budget. We want to make this as an interactive process as we can. I will come back to one of our themes this year is we know that we have some very long-term obligations that we need to make, most particularly with reference to infrastructure and with our obligations to CalPERS. We are trying in what is a good year financially for the city to set money aside and to use the increased revenues to take care of the upcoming expenses that we will incur. We are on a 10, 11-year bull market. All of us know that those kinds of markets are not sustainable and that the next recession is going to come. And when it comes, we want to be in a position that we have prepared the city to be able to absorb the blow of the next downturn in our economy.
Yeah, all I'll add is very much appreciate people coming out and your ideas. We're both accessible to call or email. Happy to have conversations, get ideas as we move forward in the process. And again, thank you to staff for pulling everything together. And I hope everyone has a great night. Thank you.
Big kudos to staff. You have no idea how many questions we ask them and how short of time frame we give them to answer those questions, and they continually amaze us with their response. So thank you and good night.